Welcome, Gunrunner.
Of all the different formats I've covered in my Amazing Exclusive series, this one is perhaps the most interesting, at least for me anyway. And that's because I have almost no real world experience with the Commodore 16, other than playing on one at a couple of events. This meant that when it came to making this video, I didn't really know where to start, and even after some pretty intensive googling, I still couldn't find any information anywhere on genuine Commodore 16 exclusives. I ended up doing a lot of searching through the excellent +4 World database, which I'll link in the description, followed by a lot of cross-referencing with Moby Games to create a list of candidates. I then spent almost a whole day playing the games to decide which 10 would feature. It was certainly an interesting voyage of discovery for me, and I was surprised just how many unique games the Commodore 16 has. I still have plenty of games left for a follow-up video too, when I eventually go down the more amazing exclusives route. But I also think that the very subject matter of this video is as interesting as the story behind it, because the C16 really wasn't designed to play games, mainly because of its incredibly limited memory, which left just 12K available out of the full 16 once the computer was up and running. In one strange quirk of its design though, it did actually have a much larger colour palette than the Commodore 64, 120 compared to 16, meaning its games did look a lot more colourful than the ones found on its otherwise superior sibling. The low cost replacement for the VIC-20, it ended up being a rather pointless machine when put next to its big brother the Commodore 64, which was constantly falling in price, and the C16 only really sold in decent numbers once retailers like Dixon's started price dumping it at under £50. Like many other so-called second tier computers in the UK, like the Atari 8-bit and MSX, the C16 saw most of its support come from budget game publishers, but it was also very well supported by the legendary Gremlin graphics too, as you'll shortly find out. But the UK wasn't the only market that was flooded with cheap C16s, as it also made its way into a lot of Italian homes too. The computer was supposed to be part of a much bigger range of Commodore computers that also included the more serious +4, which is fully backwards compatible with the C16 of course. Now we've got the background story to this video out of the way, it's time to look at the games, as I present to you 10 amazing Commodore 16 exclusives.
You're my learning machine, you work like a dream. You're my computer divine. You're 16, you're a Commodore, and you're mine, oh mine. The new Commodore 16 computer, easy to use, easy to own. The affordable learning machine for the entire family. You're 16, you're a Commodore, and you're mine, oh mine, mine, mine.
You might well have heard of, or even played, a game for the Atari 8-bit and Commodore 64 called O'Reilly's Mine. Well, Prospector Pete is pretty much the exact same game, but for the Commodore 16, which is great news as Datasoft's original game was brilliant. The game combined elements and titles such as Dig Dug and Boulder Dash, whilst adding a few original features of its own. The idea was to venture down into a mine, dig tunnels to recover all the valuable minerals in the soil, and then make it back to the top. The problem was that within seconds of starting the game, a stick of dynamite explodes at the base of the central shaft, causing it to start flooding. But this isn't the only hazard, as there are nasty creatures lurking in the mines too, that don't much like you being there. You have to be really careful in the way you dig the tunnels so you don't get trapped or drown in the water. The enemies can be killed by carefully placing a stick of dynamite, but you have to get the timing just right to do this. As the game goes on, the enemies increase in number and the flood water begins to flow faster, making things a lot more challenging. The graphics in Prospector Pete are small but perfectly formed, and there are some excellent sound effects too. Okay, so Mastertronic's game is far from original, but it still qualifies as a C16 exclusive, and it was just too good to leave out of this video. The last ever game that Gremlin released for the Commodore 16, Tube Runner is perhaps the most ambitious C16 title they published too. In the game, you're some sort of repairman who's apparently rather fed up with his life in the subterranean pipe network and wants to escape. He knows this won't be easy, but he grabs his gun, which is needed to defend himself from ugly underground creatures, and sets off. If only he could remember the best route out. The problem is, his gun only has a small amount of ammo, and he also has a limited amount of oxygen too. Oh, did I forget to mention that his employers have got wind of his escape plans and have started to shut the place down? A hero can grab keys to open any locked doors, but if he doesn't get to the end of the level within the time limit, he'll be stuck there forever and perish. As well as the keys, you can also collect extra oxygen, ammo, and valuable jewels that add to your score. It's so easy to get lost here, so the auto mapper in the status panel comes in very useful. That said, you still need to know the best route through each level, and that takes a lot of trial and error to learn. Visually, the game has a rather bland look to it, and the sound effects are also pretty average too. However, I'm still amazed that they managed to fit a game this big into such limited memory. Tube Runner is a map maker's dream. Now this one might not look like much, but looks definitely deceive when it comes to Mastertronic's Megabolts, as this is a really enjoyable maze-based shooter with more than a few tricks up its sleeve. In fact, there is so much to this game that boasts of its amazing 64 screens of action on the inlay. So what I'll do now is break down the individual parts that make it up. Firstly, there are enemies that you have to eliminate, but each type can only be destroyed in a certain way. For example, the ships have to be shot from the side or from behind. Secondly, you have the pesky time bombs that are littered throughout the many rooms and have to be defused before they go off. Thirdly, you have a limited amount of fuel to complete your task of clearing all the rooms, although more can be collected. Lastly, there is the way the maze itself can be manipulated, as walls can both be destroyed and moved in blocks, the latter of which is important for destroying certain enemies. Each of these maze-like rooms is interconnected, and the info panel at the top tells you the location ID, which is helpful for those who like to create maps. As I mentioned already, the visuals in Megabolts are quite simple, and the audio is nothing special either. But neither stopped this game from being incredibly enjoyable. Of all the games featured in this video, I found myself playing Megabolts the most. When I saw the name AutoZone, I was expecting some sort of driving game, but in actual fact this is more of a platformer with a vehicular theme. I suppose you could compare this budget game to the endless runners of the modern age like Commodore and Super Mario Run, as it features some pretty similar gameplay mechanics. The moment the game starts, the screen scrolls to the left and just keeps on moving with you guiding your car across the platforms. You can speed up, slow down, jump and double jump, with combinations of these available too. If you miss a jump and don't land on a platform properly, then you die instantly and have to start the level all over again. There really is no room for error. On later levels it also starts to add other hazards that block you from jumping, requiring absolute perfection from every single one of your movements. This is a game that you'll have to learn and memorise if you're going to get anywhere. It really is brutally hard at times. However, as hard as it is, you'll feel an enormous sense of satisfaction when you get past the bit you've been stuck on for the last 5 minutes. The visuals in AutoZone are fabulous with great colours, smooth scrolling and even some superb parallax. There's also some pretty funky in-game music as well as sound effects too. AutoZone is certainly a very challenging game, but not an unfair one, and a great example of what the C16 can do in the right hands. The unusually named Petals of Doom is undoubtedly one of the better known exclusives for the Commodore 16, and a vastly impressive feat of programming too when you consider the tight memory constraints. The plot is a bit absurd here, so I'll give you my own take on it, which hopefully makes a bit more sense. You are a spaceman guarding some sort of intergalactic greenhouse. You have a gun and a jetpack, but these have limited power so have to be used wisely. As you patrol the greenhouse monitoring your valuable plants, a squadron of aliens attack that want to eliminate them. The aliens will try to kill the plants, so you have to stop them, whilst encouraging the plants to grow. These enemies will also zap your energy too if you come into contact with them. If all your energy is depleted, you lose a life. Standing by the plants makes them grow a bit quicker, and once they all reach their full bloom, you complete the level. Each level plays exactly the same but with an increased challenge. Both your power and the growth of the plants is monitored in an info panel at the top of the screen, along with how many lives you have left and your score. As I already alluded to, the graphics in Petals of Doom are really nice indeed, and the sound effects are also excellent. The gameplay might get a little bit samey, but the non-stop action is more than enough to keep you interested. Programmed by the legendary Sean Southern at Mr. Chip Software, who would later go on to create both the Supercars and Lotus Turbo Challenge games at Magnetic Fields, Dingbat is a game that seems to have been somewhat inspired by the ultimate play the game classic Jetpack. Like its more illustrious inspiration, it's a single screen shoot 'em up where you control a little guy with a jetpack who's trying to collect enough resources to get to the next level. But there is no shipbuilding here, just the resource collecting, and there are a few more challenges to the formula too. The most obvious of these is the way the game controls, as pressing the fire button makes you shoot as well as fly. So if you stop shooting, then you plummet to the ground and die. I say ground, some levels now take place over water, which not only stops you from landing, but also swallows any resources that fall into it. There are now enemies on the ground as well as in the air too, making things that little bit harder. The resources only appear when you've destroyed enough enemies, and they have to be grabbed as they fall. You have limited energy that depletes when you are hit, but this can be topped up by collecting some of those aforementioned resources. Visually the game is nothing special, but the audio is decent enough and the controls are super responsive. Dingbat is a fun, if rather challenging shooter for the C16. In Accelerate, you play the part of an intergalactic bounty hunter using your hover car to travel around the city looking for criminals known as runners. Killing runners earns you a bounty, which you can then claim at a local bank. When you enter the bank, you take part in a short mini-game. You must try to get to the counter as quickly as possible, as the longer you wait, the lower the reward gets. You do this by selecting a queue and then moving between them as they go down. This bounty can then be spent at a shop to upgrade your car or purchase fuel. The longer you drive, the more fuel you consume, so you need to keep an eye on this at all times. Hitting an enemy will drain your shield, and your gun also has limited ammo too, so this is where that shop is all important. You must also be careful not to hit any innocent droids, as they will need to be taken to hospital to repair, well, if you have enough money to do so. If you hit 3 droids, run out of fuel, or deplete all your shields, it's game over. The city itself is set out like a giant scrolling maze, but a small scanner in the top right shows you the location of all the enemies. You'll need to try and remember the location of all the shops and banks to save time. The graphics and sound are both pretty good here, if unspectacular, but the real winner in Accelerate is the original and surprisingly deep gameplay. If we're talking about exclusive games that really push the hardware of the C16, then Mastertronic's Zadium is a prime example. This is a game that's split into 2 very distinct parts, but it's the first of these that really has the wow factor. Level 1 seems to have been very much inspired by the Sega arcade game Buck Rogers' Planet of Zoom, as you fly your ship over a planet's surface trying to keep it between the poles. You have a limited amount of fuel to do this, so you'll need to fly as fast as possible to stop this running out before you reach the end. Obviously, flying faster gives you less time to react though, and hitting a pole stops you dead, which has a really detrimental effect on your fuel drain. If you manage to make it to the end of this level, which is a pretty big challenge in itself, you're transported to the second part. Level 2 is basically a horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up that is somewhat reminiscent of Konami's Scramble, as you are flying around a dangerous cavern. Like the first part, you still have limited fuel, so you need to do this as quickly as possible, but now you die if you're hit by an enemy or crash into the walls. However, you are given 3 lives to make this section a little bit less harsh. The visuals are absolutely superb on Zadium, especially the 3D effect on the first level. The game also has an excellent title tune and good in-game effects too. This is yet another winner from Mastertronic. The original Zargon was a pretty average clone of the Sega arcade game Astro Blaster, but this sequel is a totally different affair altogether, and a lot more original in nature. This one takes the form of a horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up instead, that's set over 5 planets: Magnum, Cayley, Nebula, Nilbeg, and finally Zargon, with 16 attack waves for each one, giving a grand total of 80 levels. The alien squadrons approach in huge clusters, meaning it's very hard to take them all out in one go. But any enemy that goes past you will just fly back around, giving you another chance to hit them. This means that you have to be quite tactical in how you take them out, but you can't take too long doing this because your ship only has limited fuel, so you'll have to take a few risks. Periodically a fuel pod will fly across the screen, and you have to try and catch it, which isn't as easy as it sounds, because it moves really fast. If you hit an enemy, you instantly lose a life and have to start the stage all over again. With each level, the enemies change along with the colour palette, giving you a nice bit of variation. The graphics in Zargon's Revenge are really good. They used as much colour as possible here, and the parallax starfield in the background is a really nice effect too. The sound effects are pretty limited, but they do the job. Okay, so this isn't the most complex game out there, but it's still pretty enjoyable. Another game by Sean Southern, who many regard as the best 16 programmer ever, Tutti Frutti is far from being original, being a blatant rip-off of the hit Universal Arcade game Mr. Do, but one that I just had to feature here, because it was the very first C16 game I ever played, and widely regarded as one of the best games for the computer full stop. The gameplay is pretty much identical to its more illustrious inspiration, as you dig around each screen trying to collect all the fruit. As before, you have enemies chasing you, and these can be killed by throwing a bouncing ball at them, but you have to wait for it to come back to you before you can throw it again. You can also drop toffee apples on the enemies too, by digging tunnels underneath them so they squash the chasing baddies underneath. Clear the screen of fruit, and you move to the next one for more of the same, only harder. One big change in Tutti Frutti when compared to Mr. Do are the bonus stages, which actually rip off another classic arcade game, Sega's Pengo. So rather than digging, you now have to push blocks into the enemies instead, and you clear the level by killing them all. Visually, Tutti Frutti is lovely with all its bright colours and characterful sprites. The audio is a mixed bag though, because while it does have in-game music, which is rare on the C16, it gets very painful after about 10 seconds. Tutti Frutti is rightly regarded as a must-have title.
This is the Commodore 16 Computer in a Learner Pack. Plugs straight into your TV. It's probably the easiest computer for a beginner. The pack has a cassette recorder, a keyboard tutor program, how to program, learn to type program, and best, it's under $300. You can get this Commodore 16 Learner Pack from your retailer, and I strongly suggest you do, because I'd rather turn on my Commodore than the television.
And that rounds up my look at 10 amazing Commodore 16 exclusives. Can you think of any other one-off titles that only ever came out for this classic 8-bit computer, or do you think some of these games were unworthy of inclusion? I also love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comment section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons and YouTube backers in particular, their much appreciated pledges: Grady Haynes, Mitchell Valentino, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Sonic Mania 999, Paul Daniel, Andrew McKay, Retro Resolution, Matt Standish, James Taylor, Trogdor the Burninator, 8-Bit Guy, Luke MC, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to extra content, including downloads, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.